Hi, everyone. Judge Andrew Napolitano here for Judging Freedom. Today is Monday, July 8th, 2024. Kyle Anzalone is here with us on Did the IDF really murder Israeli civilians on October 7th? But first, this.
You all know that I am a paid spokesperson for Lear Capital, but I'm also a customer, a very satisfied customer. About a year ago, I bought gold, and it's now increased in value 23%. So $100 invested in gold a year ago is now worth $123. If you have $100 in the bank, it still shows $100, but $100 in the bank is now worth 24% less. Inflation has reduced all of your savings, all of your buying power, and mine, by 24%. And gold is largely immune from that. If you want to learn how gold will soon hit $3,200 an ounce, call Lear Capital, 800-511-4620, or go to LearJudgeSnap.com. Get your free gold report. Same experts who predicted the 23% rise that I've enjoyed have predicted this $3,200 an ounce gold. Learn about how to transfer this to an IRA. Protect your savings. 800-511-4620, LearJudgeSnap.com. Tell them the judge sent you.
Kyle, welcome here, my friend. Before we get to the report by Haaretz confirming the murder of Israeli civilians by the Israeli military on October 7th, the breaking news this morning was from the Lancet, the well-respected British medical journal, reporting that the deaths in Gaza have likely reached 186,000. That's 8% of the total population. Could the number possibly be that high?
So, yeah, I read this report as well. It's from the Lancet, which is a British medical journal. And what it's trying to do is estimate the number of excess deaths that are going to occur because of the Israeli military campaign in Gaza. And so it's not an extremely detailed article. They basically just take the death toll put forward by the Gaza Health Ministry and say that in recent conflicts, the actual number of people who die because of the war far exceeds the number of people actually killed in the conflicts, deaths of starvation, people who weren't able to get medical aid, people, somebody who has diabetes or other long-term health, issues that need constant medications. These people die because of the war, although they're not necessarily counted as a part of the death toll because they weren't blown apart by a bomb. And so these deaths typically range between 3 to 15 times the number of people who are actually killed in the conflict. And the Lancet does an estimate based off the numbers put forward by the Gaza Health Ministry, which is at 38,000 now, I think about at 37,000 when they did it, and they multiplied it by 4, which is the number that they think based on the death and destruction of Gaza. And so I'm not sure if they're actually saying that those people are currently dead, but will die in the coming months because of the pain that Israel has already inflicted upon the people of Gaza.
Let's combine this with the other news this morning about the number of people that were killed by the IDF on October 7th, killed out of convenience, killed because the Netanyahu government did not want to have to deal with them as hostages. What does Haaretz say about that?
Right. So there's a rather detailed report they have. They have senior sources from the Israeli military. And what they're essentially confirming, Judge, is what has been said on your program time and time again in recent months by journalists such as Mats Blumenthal, who maybe should deserve the most credit for reporting on this recently. And what this goes into and what it details is that Israeli commanders and commanders of Israeli forces, the IDF, ordered their soldiers to carry out the Hannibal Directive, which says that Israeli citizens, or initially it just said soldiers, but it was applied to civilians here, soldiers or citizens should be killed. Their lives should be put in danger, and that should be prioritized to prevent them from being taken back into Gaza, and then they will be captives of Hamas. And so they said anything to prevent that. And they actually created a free fire zone near the Gaza border where they were just shooting everything. They ordered their civilians out of the, or not their civilians, their military personnel out of the area. They worried that there could have been civilians there who were fleeing things like the Nova Music Festival or other kibbutzes that were taken over by Hamas, but they fired on anyone who was in that area. So anything they could do to prevent Hamas from getting more hostages. And of course, this is the policy because hostages are one of the few things that Hamas has used in the past to negotiate with Israeli on. And so they value the hostages a lot because they could get Palestinians who, are called prisoners, but they're just as much hostages as a lot of these Israelis who are captives of Hamas, in that they didn't actually commit a crime. They just violated the Israeli apartheid rules somewhere in the West Bank or in Israel. And so Hamas is trying to get them released. And, the negotiating piece is the civilians and the soldiers. And that's why they did everything they did to try to prevent them from being taken into Gaza.
All right, let me get this straight. The IDF, the Israeli military, intentionally killed, it's murder, civilians and military that they felt were in danger of being captured as hostages or had already been captured as hostages by Hamas.
Right. So there were a lot of cars that were containing members of Hamas and Israeli hostages that were driving from these kibbutzes or the Nova Music Festival back into Gaza, and Israel opened fire on all those cars. Additionally, they fired on their own military outpost.
They can call it the Hannibal Directive. They can call it whatever they want. It's murder. It's the intentional killing of innocent, unarmed, or innocent armed civilians.
Absolutely, Judge. And this has been longstanding Israeli policy. That's why journalists, again, Mats Blumenthal should get the most credit here. We're on your program very early on and writing at his outlet, The Gray Zone, very early on, that this is what happened on October 7th. And it's extremely important because the initial narrative coming out of Israel on October 7th, where all these Israeli civilians were butchered by Hamas because they just love killing Jews. And in reality, what Hamas was trying to do is they were trying to take Israeli captives so they would have something to bargain with Netanyahu. And they were, they tried to do so. And a lot of the civilians died in that process. And that's a far different narrative. And if that narrative had come out on October 7th, it's very unclear if Israel would have had the blank check that they've gotten from the Biden White House to kill and slaughter all the Palestinians that they have.
How many people died on October 7th? Do we know?
I think the Israeli number has been revised down, at least as far as numbers on their side, to 1,164. And that's about half civilians, half military / police, although there's some prison guards police officers and things like that I think were included on the civilian side that probably took up arms. And again, it's really unclear as to how many Israel has killed at this point, although it seems that the number has gone from the 14 that we knew about at the house at Kibbutz Be'eri to likely scores, if not over 100, because there were 70 cars at least traveling from these kibbutzes and Nova Music Festival back into Gaza that were destroyed by the Israeli military. And you would assume that most of those cars had hostages in them.
I would think that this is all, these numbers constitute more evidence of war crimes for the International Criminal Court. War requires proportionality. Even if 1,200, we'll round it up to give the Israelis the benefit of the doubt, had died on October 7th. How is that proportional to 186,000 killed as a consequence of the Israeli response? And Hamas is still around, and the IDF says Hamas is as strong as ever, and it can't be defeated. Thank you, Prime Minister Netanyahu.
Absolutely, Judge. And it's so much worse because a lot of the war crimes committed by Israel were learning and getting confirmation again and again that they were deliberate. Just like this new report we have out of Haaretz that really confirms things that have been reported by independent media outlet for months and months and months about October 7th. we are getting confirmation of the Israeli war crimes in Gaza being intentional and explicitly ordered. There's a new report out in 972 magazine, which is an Israeli outlet, and they talked to about a half dozen Israeli soldiers who document how they were allowed to commit war crimes at will. And so the Haaretz story about there being free fire zones in Gaza where the Israeli military drew imaginary lines on the map and they shot whoever crossed one of those lines, those existed. That Israelis forces were allowed to shoot Palestinians who were looking out their window at them, or essentially any men that they believed to be between the ages of 16 and 50 were just able to be gunned down, and that they intentionally left the corpses of these Palestinians on the ground and they were eaten by dogs and other wild animals. And we have heard from Palestinians that this has been extremely traumatizing to the children to see this going on, not just the death around them, but the smell of the decaying bodies and the fact that, again, the Israelis aren't even allowing the Palestinian the basic right of burying their dead, rather just mowing people down and leaving their bodies out to decay. They only bury them, and they really don't bury them. They just use a bulldozer to push them into piles of rubble on the side of the road. And they do this when the humanitarian aid convoys come by, so the international aid workers aren't able to see and document the atrocities that Israel is committing.
And the person behind all of this is going to get a hero's welcome. And we know more than 55 standing ovations, because the last time he was in Congress, he had 55, and our Republican friends are determined to beat that record when he addresses Congress on July 24 to try and persuade it to declare war on Iran. Something as outrageous and absurd as that, as if Iran presents a threat to the United States. Has all of this had an effect on recruiting for various militia groups in the Middle East, anti-Zionist militias?
Yes, Joe. So there's a new interview between the Washington Post and Brett Holmgren, who previously headed the State Department Intelligence Agency as an Assistant Secretary of State, and is now moving over to head the National Counterterrorism Center. So this is a promotion, and as a part of this promotion, he did this interview. And one of the questions the Washington Post asked him was about terrorism and inspiration coming from the war in Gaza. And he did say and admitted that, yes, this is going to inspire terrorism. It's a major recruiting factor for international jihadist organizations, but additionally, it's going to inspire lone wolf attackers. And so one of the things that we see right now in the United States is absolutely no control over our borders. What our State Department official is warning about here is that any of these people could be inspired to take up arms against the United States. What the U.S. is doing to support Israel as they are conducting these atrocities that we see every day, just more and more, the bodies of dead children are constantly pulled from the rubble, and it's all for the world to see on social media, and it's turning the world against the United States. Now, of course, he's really not recommending any policy changes here, and in fact, he puts most of the onus on the fact that the Hamas attack on October 7th happened in the first place. But obviously it's the result of the policy, the destruction and the killing of so many innocent civilians, and the disregard for Palestinian life in Gaza that's really inspiring and driving this movement.
Mr. Holmgren is probably one of those people that believes this war started on October 7th rather than in 1948.
Yeah, he's fully bought into the establishment narrative. He previously served in the intelligence community under the Obama administration. He has ties to the CIA. Obama actually officiated his wedding in 2018. And so this guy is buried deep within the deep state. During the Trump years, he was outside of government working at Capital One.
Capital One, the bank, the credit card people. Okay.
Yep.
Is there a serious effort on Capitol Hill? I think your colleagues wrote about it this morning, to reconstitute the draft in America?
Yeah, this is an ongoing effort, and it's come up year after year, but it seems to be getting closer to happening, where Congress is looking to use the National Defense Authorization Act, which is the yearly Pentagon funding bill. And every year they stuff a whole bunch of different issues into this because it's one of the things that Congress labels must pass, meaning that the one thing that Congress loves is war. And so they're always going to pass the defense spending bill no matter what. And so they shove all these different policies into this bill, knowing that it's going to happen when a majority of congressmen would probably never vote for an automatic registration on the draft or to draft women. But those are two policies being seriously considered this time around for the NDAA, and there's a real threat it's going to be instituted.
So right now there's a requirement for males, I think 18 to 26, to register. If you don't, it's not a crime. They'll just drive you crazy with letters in the mail and maybe emails. This would make the registration automatic for everybody that I think you said earlier goes up to, what's the top age on this proposal?
I think it's in the 30s or 26, but I'm not. I would have to look at
Does
that.
it apply to members of Congress as well? If there's any that are that young?
I don't think there are any that are that young. And obviously, if their children violated this, I'm sure they would be exempt from it as well. And one of the threats here, Judge, isn't just that they would reinstitute the draft, which is looking more and more likely as we get closer to a potential new war in Lebanon, an escalation where the U.S. is directly involved in Ukraine. But it's just a complete database of American males that the government is going to have. There's a lot of information that you have to supply there. And so it would give them a new way to kind of monitor people and have more information about you in a centralized data bank.
I see another piece here, the dreadful continuity of British foreign policy. Don't tell me Keir Starmer has reappointed Lord David Cameron as foreign minister. That goofball.
Yeah, Judge, it doesn't look like it's getting any better in the UK, even with the change in leadership. Much like the situation here in the US, they have their version of Democrats and Republicans. And of course, they have Nigel Farage, who I think is a little bit more of an outsider than Donald Trump is, maybe more of an RFK Jr. type, where he really is skeptical, I think, about the war in Ukraine. But overall, the way British politics played out, I don't think his party actually ended up doing that well. I think they only captured about 4 seats in the parliament. And overall, Labour did very well. And the new prime minister, meet the new boss, same as the old boss as far as foreign policy goes.
So Nigel Farage is not going to be in the cabinet.
It doesn't appear that way.
And David Cameron is not going to be foreign minister, but he'll be replaced with someone probably not as goofy, but with the same mentality with respect to Gaza and with respect to Ukraine.
Yeah, I assume so, Judge.
The talking of Ukraine, the outgoing Secretary General of NATO, Stoltenberg, said that NATO has 500,000 troops ready to move into Ukraine. But I don't know if he knows what he's talking about. Where would they have come from? Who would command them? Where are they now? How have they been trained? What equipment do they have? Where are they going to go?
Yeah, it's all on paper, Judge. This has been something that NATO has talked about for some time now, that they've been preparing to have 350,000 troops that would be ready to deploy to the front lines in a war with Russia within 1 month. And they said they had exceeded that last month and it was at 450,000. And now I see Stoltenberg floating the number of 500,000. However, the West isn't producing the munitions to arm them. We can't even arm the Ukrainian military in their limited, war as far as it would go. I mean, we're talking about world war. We're talking about war between NATO and Russia. So how would we arm the Polish army, all these Baltic armies, if we can't even arm the Ukrainians? And so this is absolutely absurd. It's all on paper. Different governments will say, oh yeah, we could commit 30,000 forces and we commit 50,000. It's not actually real. It can't actually materialize.
Joe Biden keeps saying that, I guess you could stop right there. Joe Biden keeps saying, it's like when I was at Fox and I would say, according to the New York Post, and my colleague would say, oh, you could stop right there. It doesn't matter what you're going to say now, given the source. But Joe Biden keeps saying Vladimir Putin wants to attack Poland. Is there any evidence for this whatsoever?
There's absolutely no evidence of this at all, Judge. If you just look at the reality of the situation on the ground in Ukraine, after Russia initially invaded in 2022, Putin offered not only to withdraw to the previous Russian borders, he was willing to leave the situation over Crimea ambiguous. So obviously Putin's main goal isn't to expand Russian territory and to color, more of Europe in the Russian color on the map, but rather the security of Moscow by maintaining and ensuring that Ukraine remains a neutral state. That's all Putin really wants. He doesn't care about Poland. He doesn't care about the Baltics. This is just Joe Biden's fantasy.
President Zelensky said over the weekend that he's not in favor of a ceasefire. Now, I know he says a lot of crazy things, but how could he not be in favor of a ceasefire?
Well, this has been the kind of the mantra of the West, and we saw it play out in Gaza as well, where even a ceasefire, even a temporary pause in fighting, is always portrayed as a giveaway to the other side. So Zelensky says, if we even have a ceasefire, this means that Russia will use it to regroup and strengthen, and so we cannot allow that to happen. Now, in one sense, he may be right, because logistically, Russia is outproducing the West, and Russia is far closer to the front lines than, say, the United States is, and so it's going to be far easier for them to resupply and refresh their forces. Additionally, Ukraine is struggling to get enough troops to the front line, where Russia seems to be well able to supply the operations that they want to conduct. And so there may be a little bit of truth to it there, but really, I think what the West is always worried about is a ceasefire will lead to an end of the conflict. And that's why they didn't want to halt the fighting in Gaza, because they knew if the fighting halts, then it's going to be harder to resume. And it's the same situation in Ukraine, where if they stop the fighting, then maybe a deal will be worked out, and this war that the West sees as bleeding and weakening Russia will come to an end.
Last subject matter. Ukraine has a new president. He's a cardiac surgeon. He's a moderate. He's not a religious fanatic, and it wasn't even a close race. Is there likely to be a significant change in Iran's foreign policy as a result of this, or is it mainly domestically driven?
Judge, I think it's going to be maybe a slight change in foreign policy. The incoming leader, our president, did run on this concept of trying to negotiate and get along with the U.S. and hostilities with the U.S. And so that would be good to see. At the same time, foreign policy is really driven by the Ayatollah. And obviously, he remains in place and is the same man before and after the former president's death. And so this may have some impact. I think anytime you have a change in leadership, it's at least an opportunity to, quote, start fresh and try again anew from both sides. And so maybe there could be some workable decisions here, depending on who Iran puts in different positions in the cabinet as like foreign minister and things like that. Maybe they could get along with their American counterparts. But in reality, Judge, the problem here is that Biden only has a few months left in office. It looks more and more like every day, even if he does make it to election day, there's no way that he's going to get elected, and Trump's victory looks more and more guaranteed. And so from the Iranian perspective, why would they make a deal with the Biden administration when they cut a deal with the Obama administration and Trump just walked out of that? It wouldn't be beneficial to them. So I don't think anything is going to happen, at least not until sometime next year, when Trump is firmly reestablished as the American president, and maybe the Iranians could deal with him. Maybe Trump will say that, oh, I drove you back with my sanctions and I cut a tough deal, when in reality that just doesn't seem likely, because Trump's main backer, Mariam Adelson, is the one who I think really drove him to abandon the Iran nuclear deal in 2018 when he initially did.
No changes before November 5th, unless, as our friend Gerald Celente likes to warn, when all else fails, they take you to war. Unless there's a false flag. And America unites behind Joe Biden as a wartime president. Please, Lord, don't let that happen. Thank you very much, my dear friend. By the way, I watched your podcast, Conflicts of Interest, and I encourage Judging Freedom viewers to watch it as well. Great job, Kyle. Thanks for your time.
Well, thank you so much. And I just want to say congratulations to you and the entire Judging Freedom team on hitting 400,000 YouTube subscribers. It is just such a huge deal. A couple years ago, I think there's a lot of people who would have had a wish to have Professor Satz and Mearsheimer and McGovern and Larry Johnson to be able to talk to hundreds of thousands of people every week. And you are providing that platform. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you. And we're happy that you're a part of it as well. Our goal is 500,000 by Christmas. At the rate we're going, we might make it by Thanksgiving. But thank you very much, Kyle. All the best to you.
Thank you.
Of course. Coming up tomorrow, a very busy day for you. At 8 in the morning, Pepe Escobar. At 9:30 in the morning, Professor Jeffrey Sachs. At 10:15 in the morning, Ambassador Charles Freeman. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Matt Ho. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Karen Kwiatkowski. At 4:30 in the afternoon, the inimitable Scott Ritter. Judge Napolitano for Judging Freedom.